started. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Kimberly Goldstein. I am the lead occupational therapist at Expressive Connections. And today we're talking about thinking outside the screen, strategies to support your child's learning style. And this is a part 1 presentation because we're going to talk about some information first and then hopefully have the chance to apply it later on in a more hands-on activity-based way. So we're going to jump right in. And before we get to our presentation, I do have to say, in light of current events, it is essential to state that Expressive Connections and myself stand with the protesters out there igniting positive change. We will be posting additional resources. We do have a toolkit that was just released today on how to discuss race with children, and we're coming out with another mental health toolkit shortly. So keep your eyes out for those, and we plan to extend our support as we continue to educate ourselves and others. Black Lives Matter. With that being said, we'll jump in today. So our objectives are stated here. We're going to define and identify 3 different learning styles because it is important to note that not all of us learn the same way. We're going to look at the impact of distance learning for each style, provide strategies to support each learning style, discuss screen time and appropriate recommendations for kids, as well as allow time for questions and answers at the end. A few notes here. So because I'm talking so much about screen time and about how to protect ourselves from it, recover from it, feel free to take this time to simply listen. My slides are here as a guide to provide some visuals for you visual learners out there, but you can simply listen and I will send them out later on with the important information so you don't have to continue staring at a screen if you're feeling that fatigue. Give your eyes a break. The presentation will also be recorded. We will share it with you and feel free to pass it along to anyone who you think might find it helpful. And during the presentation, definitely submit your questions using the chat or Q&A features as they come up. I will have a chance to go over them at the end. All right, so we're going to start off. Did you take our quiz? So this is something that I had developed to really help drive this point home and see how this could relate to your own child. And if you didn't, don't worry about it. It can be found on our blog with the website here. I can also send it out afterwards, but it asks some questions. They might not all fit your circumstances exactly, but the idea is to see these patterns in how kids learn. Now, the results that you might get from this quiz are each listed here. So there's visual learners, auditory learners, and tactile or kinesthetic learners. We're going to break each of these down into what they really mean. Now, before I do that, I will offer the disclaimer that you can have a combination of learning styles. So you might be a visual auditory mix, or your child might be an auditory tactile mix. So don't think of this as so black and white, either or. So to jump in with visual, we think about relying on visual input. So these are the kids who learn best when they have pictures, diagrams, graphics, videos, and they enjoy really bright colors and patterns that help draw their attention to certain content. So these are the people who are really good at reading maps. I am not one of them. If you give me a map, I don't know where to go. But if you really enjoy looking at those images and just know how to follow them, you're likely a visual learner or towards that end of our learning spectrum. Now, the caveat here is that the same information that helps us learn can also be distracting when it's not supporting our learning. So for visual learners, because they are so tuned into visual input, any ambient visual input that is unexpected or unrelated becomes distracting. So this might mean that those internet pop-ups, those ads that just come out of nowhere when you might be reading an article, very distracting. People walking by in the same room, or if kids are sitting near a window or a door, that could be really distracting. A cluttered workspace, if there's a lot to look around on the desk or the table, that is also distracting. So this is kind of twofold. We can really use visual input to our advantage, but it also becomes really distracting if not used in the right manner to support learning. So similar, you're going to start to see these patterns draw out with auditory learners. They really rely on auditory input, those things that we can hear. So those are the verbal instructions, music, songs, rhymes, repetition really helps drive the point home for auditory learners. These are the people, this is me, who listen to the GPS directions. So if your phone is in your little caddy and you're trying to find your way, I don't know what the map is saying. I don't look at it, but I do listen so that I will know where to turn left or when to, keep going on the freeway. These people typically respond well to a traditional lecture type lesson where children are sitting, they're listening to the teacher. These kiddos might also enjoy conversation. So that verbal back and forth of speaking, listening, speaking again comes really smoothly to them. Now, similarly, they are also distracted by any ambient auditory input that happens to be going on. So this could be a TV or a radio in the background. This could be classmates chit-chatting during the lesson. This could be the lawnmower going outside if that's when the school decided to mow the field. That's right by the window. So thinking really carefully about all of those other factors that might be affecting learning. Finally, we have tactile kinesthetic, and this is learning through touch and movement. Okay, we see a lot of kids really enjoy learning this way. Even if it's not their primary learning style, this helps to drive points home as a secondary learning style. And so these include activities like building, dancing, any movement, hand gestures, full body movements, sensory play, getting their hands to feel different textures are all so important for these learners. These are the kids that seek touch. They might really enjoy hugs. They're the ones that often touch the wall as they walk by because they're just seeking all of that touch, and it's really helping them learn all about their environment. So for these kids, for all kids, recess is important, but especially for these movers and shakers, because again, they are going to be distracted by the need to move, just like how the need to move helps them. So recess is a really important outlet. Having active activities as part of the school day is really important for them. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully, once you take the quiz, it will start to connect the dots of like, oh, my kid definitely fits into this category. That sounds more like my child. And we're going to jump in further and see how we can build strategies that really address each of these. Cool. So we're going to talk about virtual learning. And what I really want to emphasize here is that this is new for everyone. This is not something that was typically done in elementary school, in preschools even. And so we're all adjusting to how this is going. So if you are feeling frustrated or uncertain with how you're doing or how your child's doing, totally normal, and don't feel guilty or feel bad about feeling that way. But what I do want to highlight here with virtual learning is that we're relying heavily on visual and auditory input because it involves looking at the screen and listening to the teacher. And because we're centered around the computer now, we might be limiting that tactile and kinesthetic learning as a result. Now, some of you might have had really positive experiences with teachers as they made this transition, who were great about incorporating active activities and movement. And if you do, please feel free to share them in the chat, the comment section, because I would love to hear how teachers are making this happen. If it didn't quite happen, again, keep in mind that I said this is new for everyone. And so we're still kind of figuring this out. And as we transition into the extended school year, teachers are going to continue figuring this out. Now, because we're talking about virtual learning and the fact that a lot of kids are using screens in ways that they didn't normally before, I do want to bring up screen time recommendations. And these have been issued by the American Academy of Pediatrics because there are now more screens than ever. And so what those pediatric experts are saying is that under age 2, we want to avoid screens except for video chatting. So that means when you're on Skype or even Zoom is really popular now to talk with relatives, because that's an active social experience and it's about connecting with family. That's really where we want to target the screen time. Now, for ages 2 to 5, so looking at that preschool or kindergarten age range, we want to limit screen time to 1 hour per day. Now, this came out before the switch to virtual and distance learning. I believe these were their 2019 recommendations. And so obviously there is a shift now, but even at the time that these came out, there was a distinction drawn between educational screen time and other screen time. And the idea that children can learn through screens, they can be very important educational tools, but the key here is to make it an active experience rather than just a passive experience of a child watching, but how can we make them actively discuss and begin to implement and integrate the information that they are learning. So an important analogy, I didn't come up with this, I'm not taking credit, but I think it's great to help parents understand that screen time is similar to junk food. So we're not saying to never do it, but that it's okay in small doses. It's okay in moderation. And usually, especially with junk food, there are certain expectations, right? You might have a dessert schedule, or we know that we have to do these things before we have access to junk food. It's the same with screen time, that we want to limit it and we want to make it clear when that becomes available. Okay, so if you attended my previous webinar on Regulation 101, this might look familiar to you. If you didn't, don't worry, I'm gonna go over it again, but this is our sensory cup. And this is something that I discussed as an occupational therapist with training in sensory processing that is really important to keep in mind with our kiddos when we're thinking about arousal, regulation, and attention. And what I discussed with the sensory cup is that we have different size cups for each sensory system. So that means tactile, visual, auditory, all of these learning systems, in addition to movement, how our body and our muscles perceive movement and changes in space. And so the really important part here is that for those kiddos with that big movement cup, right, that need to have a lot of movement before their body feels ready to sit down and pay attention and feel okay and ready to learn, they need to get that movement experience in. And so because with virtual learning, we might not be having these same movement experiences throughout the school day, it might be important to incorporate some preparatory movement to help those kids feel ready to then sit down because their movement cup has already been full. And the same thing with tactile. If they're looking to touch things and we don't have the opportunities to touch because we don't have the same manipulatives and toys available, how can we fill that tactile cup before the lesson so that then they're ready to go? Now we're going to jump into specific strategies. And I did this by learning style. And these are the printable infographics that will be available after this presentation. So if you registered, I already have your email address. I will send them out. If you're watching this either on Facebook Live or at a later date that I don't have your email address, don't worry. I'm going to put my contact info on at the end, and then you'll be able to get access to these. I'll send them right over. But first, I'm going to jump in to strategies for visual learners. So there are different ideas here, different things that we could try out, and a lot of strategies. This is for all things, but especially for kids learning, because kids are so different, are kind of a trial and error basis. So these are some things that we might want to try and see how they go. So some ideas for visual learners is to request materials from the teacher ahead of time. That way we can start looking them over and really have the time to dive in and see what's going to be discussed. And that way they're already available as your teacher is discussing something on the screen. The other one here, I'm going to move myself, find videos on YouTube related to the content. So there's so many videos out there right now, especially with YouTube at our fingertips and all other different educational websites, that if you just type in the content area, some really helpful ones might come up. My favorite example here, because I love Sesame Street, they do a great job teaching the alphabet. They always bring in the ABCs, the letters, regardless of the topic. But it can be done with most of your children's preferred cartoon characters or any other learning sites that come up. Another idea here is to create a concept map or some kind of diagram that outlines what your child is learning. And again, make this an active experience, involve your child with it. So I have an example printed here. And this one is looking at the three little pigs. Hopefully you can see this. It's okay if you can't see all the small text, but this is what is called a mind map in the teacher world. And it looks at the three little pigs here. We have the big bad wolf here. And then bridging out from these, we have these ideas that the three little pigs had the three different types of houses, the actions that the wolf did. So we're kind of breaking it down. And this is just an example of using a story, but it can be used with all different kinds of topics, with different seasons, with different letters, with different ideas all over. And what it does is it makes them more visual in nature. So rather than just talking about the content or seeing those fleeting visuals that are then gone after the lesson is over, how can we now use that information and create a lasting visual that you have access to time and time again? Another idea here is to highlight important information in bright colors. Remember, visual learners love those bright colors. That's what draws their eye. And so if there's really something important that we want to focus on, then we want to use those bright colors to our advantage. And another one here that I'm going to demonstrate is called a worksheet window. And what that does is it takes a worksheet, which might be visually overwhelming, because remember I said visual learners tune into visual input, but if there's too much, then their eyes are going all over this worksheet and we don't know which addition problem we're on. So what I did, really simple, it's just a piece of cardstock and I traced the size of each problem so that now I can hold up my worksheet window, and instead of seeing all of the addition problems on here, I only see 2 plus 3, and I still have space to write my answer. And then when I go to the next one, I simply slide it over. And again, I'm only seeing the one problem that I'm working on. So we're not overwhelmed with all of this visual input all over the worksheet. All right. Now, strategies for auditory learners. Remember, these are those kids that are listening. They might enjoy repeating and speaking back. So my advice here is to minimize the surrounding noise. Create a quiet study space for your child that's drowning out that outside noise, maybe other noise within rooms, because everybody's working and learning from home now. So how can we create that division in that quiet learning zone? Putting carpets on the floor or fabric on the wall might also help to absorb and dampen some of that environmental noise. Using music or rhythms to remember important concepts. So this is a big one. Any songs that you have, any rhymes that you have, either that you make up or that the teacher uses in class, being sure to repeat those so that they really get lodged in there in our brain. One of mine that I still remember, I was thinking about this, that I still remember from elementary school is when I was learning my times tables and multiplication problems, we learned that 8 and 8 go to the store to buy Nintendo 64. And back when I was in school, Nintendo 64 was the toy to have. So we knew that 8 times 8 equaled 64. But any of them that work for your child, any mnemonic devices, songs, really help solidify that. And also allow time to process information. Remember, these auditory learners are tuned into all of the noises going on around them. And so sometimes that means that they might hear something and they might need to really focus on it, repeat it in their mind, and then have time to process it and respond. Have the child repeat the information aloud as well. This could be done when you're studying spelling words. It's so great if you just repeat that and not only thinking it in your head, not only writing it down, but saying it, because that's what helps it sink in for auditory learners. And finally, record lessons for additional listening. So I'm not sure which platforms that all the teachers are using right now, but if there is an option, either on their end or on your end, to record it, just like this webinar is recorded and you can listen back for all of these tips, it helps our kids to have the opportunity to listen back as well. All right, and now strategies for tactile kinesthetic learners. And like I said, a lot of kids fall into this category, whether it's a primary or a secondary learning style. So trying out these strategies, even if it's not their primary learning style, might really give us a great window into how they're learning. So one idea here is to use manipulatives and multisensory materials to demonstrate concepts. So I do this a lot in my therapy sessions. So sometimes I work on teaching handwriting with a child, and we're working on how do we remember to write a letter a certain way. And so I might have that child write it on a chalkboard, use a toothpick to write it in Play-Doh, use our finger to write it in kinetic sand or moon sand that sticks together. We might bend the shapes of each letter using pipe cleaners or wiki sticks, which are made of wax. So we're using all of these different sensory materials in different ways to really understand that one concept. Take movement breaks as needed, especially while we're doing virtual learning. So have your child, even if it's get up and do a bunch of jumping jacks or squeeze our hands a couple times while we're, because we have to stay seated during the lesson, but figure out how we can inject movement into the day. Now, act out concepts using the full body. This is something that I love to do also. I'm going to move my camera back here. But again, building off of that handwriting example, if we're learning how to write the letter J, and it's just not sinking in to see that letter J in front of us because we're not really visual learners, then I might act it out with my whole body and say, first we go down, curve around, and cross the top. So now the whole body is moving, the hands are moving, the arms are moving, you can get up and you could do it from ceiling to floor so that you're really moving the trunk muscles too. So that way we're getting the motion down, but through moving our own body. Consider alternative seating as well. And this can be done within the school setting or at the home setting, but think about how can we change it up so that we don't have to be so still, even when we're staying seated. So can your child sit on a yoga ball? Again, in some ways, this can be really difficult. It requires a lot of core strength. So we don't want to choose something that is distracting, where your child is focusing so hard on just staying seated that now we're not paying attention, but something that gives us just the right movement opportunities that we can pay attention while all of this is happening. So a wiggle seat, those are cushions that are filled with either a sand type material or air that allows the child to kind of move around without feeling like they need to get out of their seat to move around the classroom. And finally, a kick band, I'm going to demonstrate this one too. This is just a resistive exercise band like you might see in physical therapy offices for strengthening. But if you take it and you tie it around the legs of a classroom chair or a chair at home, now it becomes a band. It's at the bottom of your chair that your child can now kick their feet against, and they get some resistance. It activates their muscles and they're moving and grooving while they're still watching the lesson and listening. So it's similar to how I tend to tap my foot a lot as kind of a fidgety movement while I'm listening, but it's not detracting from my attention. Okay, it's just helping me move while I'm staying seated and listening and still paying attention. Finally, thinking about keeping hands busy with fidgets. Remember, our tactile learners tend to like to use their hands a lot and feel around. So what I have here is my fidget box, like many OTs have. And this, again, is going to be a trial and error kind of thing, because the key here is that we want a fidget that helps keep the hands occupied in a productive way, allowing the brain to still focus on what we're learning, but does not become so distracting. So we have different textured items here. This is my caterpillar fidget that our hands could kind of move with. We could even do it under the desk. You can't even tell that I'm still moving my hands. And if it allows the child to continue to stay focused on the lesson, that might be something that works. We have ones here that we can kind of push and pull and curve. These pieces even pull apart. So again, if it's the right balance of being productive and not distracting, that's something that we could try too. All right. Now, I also have suggestions to draw out big visuals. And the idea here is that the paper is so big, kind of like butcher paper or kind of big mural paper, that you could hang up on the wall or using the sidewalk, doing sidewalk chalk to draw out our big ideas. So that way we're using all of our muscles, and this is especially great for those visual / kinesthetic learners when we have two learning styles, so that we could see something and really use our body to make it. So one example with this is drawing out the stages of butterfly development, because that's something that a lot of kids learn about. So you could draw out the egg, and then you could draw out the caterpillar, the cocoon, and finally the butterfly. And finally, narrate everyday ideas to relate them back to school topics. Remember, we learn a lot more through active experiences rather than that passive, just watching or listening something. So how in everyday life can you bring back those school topics? So one of my favorite examples here is that if you're in the kitchen, your child can help you prepare a recipe, which is a great in vivo learning opportunity for fractions. If you need, a quarter cup of flour, or maybe you need a half cup, but you only have the quarter cup measurement, how many times do you have to fill it to get a half cup of flour? So really great opportunities like that. Maybe you're doubling the recipe and you have to multiply all of the fractions. All right, now I do want to touch on screen time recovery, because we did talk about recommendations and how, with all of the screens going on now, can our kids recover, but also you? Because I know a lot of parents, a lot of caregivers have Zoom meetings for work right now. They're FaceTiming a lot with family. They're doing webinars like this, where we might still be looking at the screen. So some really simple, easy to hit ideas are to take breaks. So it's recommended to take a break from looking at the screen every 20 minutes. And that can mean getting up, going for a walk, doing something else. It could simply mean averting your gaze, maybe doing some paperwork at that point that's away from the screen, maybe reading a book, maybe taking a break and going to wash the dishes or helping your child with their homework at that point, whatever it is. The other idea is to power down, and the recommendation is to power down electronics at least 1 hour before bedtime. And this has to do with the blue light emitted from screens. You might have heard about this, but the idea is that screens emit this type of light that actually does disturb our circadian rhythms, which is the sleep-wake cycle. So by looking at a blue screen, and that includes televisions, computers, your phone, so scrolling on your phone before bed, it wakes the brain back up. It says, oh no, I'm actually not tired. And so then it makes it really hard to fall asleep. And this goes for adults and for children. You can also adjust the computer settings. So I'll show you right here. I can adjust my brightness. So now it's really dim. I can make it brighter. And you might want different settings at different points of the day. It depends on how the sunlight is hitting it. But by dimming the light, it can take some of that strain off your eyes. You can also play around with the contrast, which would basically invert the colors. So just how this is a white screen now, if I change the contrast, it would change all of the white background to black, and it would change the black text to white. So kind of make it like X-ray vision. And the idea there is that the black screen causes less of an eye strain because it's not so bright. Just be warned when you do that. I tried it out on mine. It might adjust some of your personalized settings. So if you have a photo as your background, or if you've changed the colors of toolbars or something like that, if you change the contrast and then change it back, it might look different. Other ways to recover from screen time is to find leisure activities away from the screen. I know it's tricky now. We're still just starting to reopen the world, but taking walks, little nature walks or hikes, engaging, even if it's just playing a simple game of catch or tag around the block, but finding something that you could do with you and your kids that's apart from screen time. We touched on this earlier, but have a screen time routine. So that way kids know the expectations around screens, when they will become available, how long they're able to be on the screen, which activities are are available on the screen. Is the internet free reign? Do they have certain websites or apps that they can access? So that way we're taking a power struggle out of it, and we're also setting clear limits on it. Finally, make it an active experience. So we've touched on this too, that if your child is sitting and watching maybe PBS Kids or some kind of educational program, how can you sit there and discuss it with them so that it's not just a passive experience, but they're still thinking and learning and processing everything that they're seeing? And my last one here is to set a positive example. We do have recommendations for children to limit screen time, but a lot of adults could also benefit from limiting screen time as well. So put your own phone down every so often, your iPad, whatever it is, and show your children how you can connect to each other without the screens. All right, so I have my references here. If you have any questions or want more information, feel free to ask me. And I'm going to open this up for questions right now. Let's see, I'm going to take off my screen share. Let's see. There we go. So feel free to submit your questions through the chat or the Q&A features. I see some starting to come in. If you're on Facebook, feel free to comment with your questions and hopefully they'll get relayed back in here. And I will pop up our contact info as well. Here we go. Okay, so I do see one question over here about how do I make sure that this happens in the classroom? And that's a great question because I know many of you are here as parents or caregivers that now you have some more insight into how your child may learn. I gave you some specific strategies. And so I'd say what would be really helpful is to communicate with your child's teacher. Remember that you are the expert on your child. Your child's teacher is an expert in early education or child development or whatever specific subject that they're teaching, but you are the expert on your child. So if you notice certain patterns or certain strategies that work, then definitely bring them to your teacher and bring them to your child's teacher in a way to figure out how they can be implemented to support your child. I would also say if you're working with a therapist, a speech language pathologist, an occupational therapist like myself, and they have shared strategies that might work either at home or at the classroom, you can encourage that collaborative care too. I've spoken to many teachers on behalf of my clients. I've been present at IEP, individualized education program meetings to discuss these strategies and accommodations that might work for kids. Right, hopefully that helps. Let's see, let me know if you have any questions that come up. Like I said, I will share the visuals and I'm seeing one more question over here about where do I find those alternative seating arrangements that I mentioned. So those were the things like the wiggle cushion, different yoga balls and yoga seats. And some of those I did include in a sensory toys for sensible play blog post. And like I said, it's the same spot where you could find the quiz. So it's expressiveconnections.org/blog, B-L-O-G. And you can find some links to specific products or just the names of products that might be helpful for your child. All right, so I don't think I see any other questions for right now, but please do take my contact info down. Feel free to take a picture of this slide if any questions do come up, and I hope to continue the conversation with you. So please let me know if anything comes up. Thank you so much for joining me today, taking the time out of your week. I hope that you learned something helpful for distance learning as we continue through the summer or next year. Have a good one.